The machine I'm using right now is on a local network where there's a NAT router between the local network and the rest of the network. So we can do some experiments where I use my local machine, another machine that's on this same local network, and a remote server that's outside of this local network. My local machine is going to have address 10.00.43 the way I've connected, and I'll have a couple of windows open for that machine. The nearby machine has 10.00.136 with the yellow window that I'll use, and the purple window will correspond to the remote server. The code that I'll run is a variant of our UDP server. So here is a server that is going to echo back the packet. It's almost the same code that we had before for our server, just with this echo. The client is going to do a little bit more. It's going to take the server name and server port as command line arguments. It'll also take its own client port as a command line argument. Normally we would let the OS pick that for us, but I'm choosing to pick it myself in this case. It sends the UDP packet as before, and then it's waiting for the server to echo back the data that it sent. So here is my local machine. I will run the server at 5678. This is also my local machine. I will run the client, connecting to localhost at port 5678, and I'm using 12345 as the client's port number. We see that the client sent its data and got that same data back, reporting that is 12345, and the server received that from 1.12345. I could try again. I could also use my machine's own address instead of the loopback device. And now we see the server reports that it hears from there. Let's try the same thing on my nearby machine, where I can run the client, connecting to 10.00.43 at port 5678, and also using 12345 on this other machine. The same thing pretty much happened. We see that on our server, we hear from that client. It is at the other machine, so that's 136. And it was the port number that we picked. But now, let's try that one more time, but using the remote machine. I run the client there, connecting to 10.00.43, port 5678, with some local port number. You can see that this remote client gets stuck. That's because our server running on this machine never hears from that remote client. It is sitting outside the network, so it cannot see 10.00.43. It would see some other machine on its own local network, if there is any, and not connect to the one that we have before. On the other hand, if on this remote machine we run the server, this remote machine is address number 165, 124, 184, 132, we are able to connect to that server, and we can see that it heard from a client on port 12345. But notice this port number, this address is completely different. That address turns out to be the address of my NAT router that reports everything as coming from itself. That NAT router picked the number 12345, but it didn't have any reason to change it from the one that I picked here, and so it stayed the same. But if I use a different machine on the same local network, again connecting to that remote machine, then it works again. We're able to connect to the server. The server hears from the same NAT router, but at a different port number. It couldn't use the port 12345 because that corresponds back to my local machine here. It had to pick a different port number to map back to the yellow nearby machine. Let's try one more thing, which is on my local machine, run a Docker instance. So this is a kind of virtual machine that runs as a process in my machine, but it looks like its own operating system in its own machine, and it will have its own network address. That is going to be my blue window over here. I'm going to start up Docker, and in this Docker instance, I run the client, connecting to my local machine server at port 12345, and we see that inside of this virtual machine, it is able to reach the enclosing machine. But where does this machine hear from? 10.00.43, which is itself at some port number 52807. So not the same port number, not the same address as the virtual machine calls itself. The virtual machine thinks it's 172.17.02. But this 172 area is also a local use address. And what this means is that the Docker instance here has its own NAT to translate from the virtual machine world to my local machine world. And then if we went out to the a remote server, it would even have yet another layer of NAT translation. And of course, if I wanted to connect to that Docker instance from the remote server, it would be quite difficult because I would first need to contact this machine and then contact the Docker instance here. So these are all the sorts of issues that can come up when you are running servers on local machines and trying to reach them from remote machines or trying to reach into Docker instances.